Picture this. It's the spring of 2003, and the United States military has just rolled into the city of Najaf in Iraq.
Right.
You've got the most technologically advanced, heavily armed, and heavily funded secular force on the planet, and they are trying to establish order in a really volatile region.
And if you follow the traditional playbook of international relations, the next step is pretty obvious, right?
Exactly. I mean, the military commanders are supposed to go to the local mayor or like the police chief or the regional governor to negotiate terms.
Yeah, that's what the secular spreadsheets tell you to do.
But they quickly realized that was just a completely empty gesture. The secular politicians sitting in those official government offices had like almost zero actual authority.
Not at all.
So, to get absolutely anything done, the commanders had to bypass the government entirely, walk down this narrow, unassuming alleyway, and knock on the door of Grand Ayatollah Ali al-Sistani.
A reclusive, elderly religious scholar.
Right, and why? Because globally, the world just does not run on the clinical geopolitical logic that we think it does.
It really doesn't. And honestly, it is a profound blind spot in how we view global affairs. For decades, the dominant academic theories essentially treated the world as a giant chessboard, you know?
Yeah, where the only pieces that mattered were state economies and military arsenals.
Exactly. But what the situation in Najaf demonstrated, and what we see repeatedly across the globe, is that the absolute deepest reservoirs of power are often found in ancient texts or sacred rituals and these centuries-old cultural narratives.
Which brings us to today's exploration. Welcome, everyone, to the 9th episode of the Diplomacy and International Relations Summer Series. I'm your host, and I'm joined today by our resident religious studies scholar and expert in religion and politics.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here.
It's great to have you. And real quick, before we jump into the thick of it, I just want to encourage all our listeners to follow and subscribe. Also, remember, you can subscribe to our Patreon. The link is in the description. It helps keep the show running, and you get access to extra episodes, plus our weekly and monthly briefings on Danish politics, which is actually going to be highly relevant today.
Oh, absolutely. The intersections there are fascinating.
Yeah. So our mission today is to completely dismantle the building blocks of faith and culture.
Yeah.
We want to show how they aren't just, background noise or private weekend activities.
Right. They are the active, powerful engines driving treaties, conflicts, and major power shifts.
So let's unpack this from the very beginning. We have to start with this massive return of religion to the public square, because the academic world of international relations practically ignored religion for a very long time, didn't it?
Oh, they entirely ignored it.
Yeah.
During the Cold War, the prevailing assumption among political scientists was basically that as societies modernized, as they built more factories and developed better technology, they would just naturally stop caring about religion.
Like it was something we would just outgrow.
Exactly. It was known as the secularization thesis. Theorists fully believed that the rational, bureaucratic state would gradually replace any need for religious institutions.
Right.
And that faith would eventually retreat completely into the private sphere of the home, just totally removed from the hard politics of statecraft.
But then, of course, September 11th happened.
Yeah. The post-9/11 era forced a massive and, frankly, a very painful reckoning within the field. Robert Keohane, who is this towering figure in international relations theory, pointed out this abrupt realization that world-shaking political movements are very often fueled by intense religious fervor.
It shattered the illusion that global politics was just a purely secular game of state interests.
It really did.
And when you look at the raw demographics, it's almost absurd that it took a catastrophic event to wake the academic world up. I mean, the data shows that worldwide, 8 out of 10 people identify with a religious group.
80% of the globe.
Right. If you're a diplomat trying to predict human behavior and you are actively ignoring the core operating system of 80% of the population, you are flying completely blind.
You're guaranteed to fail. And the crucial point here is how that 80% structures their public life. Religion doesn't just offer comfort. It actively redefines where power resides in a society.
Okay, so let's break that down. The sources talk about how gods and divine forces are permitted to operate in the public square, and they draw a distinction between a fundamental approach and a contextual approach.
Yes.
I want to try an analogy here to see if I'm grasping the mechanics of this. Is the fundamental approach essentially like a smartphone's operating system? Like it wants to control the hardware, dictate how every single process runs, and just manage the entire device from the ground up.
That's a great way to think about it.
And then the contextual approach is more like an incredibly popular app. It runs alongside other apps, it contributes heavily to the experience, but it isn't trying to hijack the entire phone.
I love that analogy. To take it a step further, in the fundamental approach, the operating system's source code is considered divinely authored.
Oh, so it can't be updated or altered by human legislation.
Exactly. The goal is to organize the entire society according to strict divine commands. A prime example is the state of Iran. The highest judicial authority there draws its principles directly from the Shia branch of Islam.
And it's not just like an advisory board.
Well, they have real teeth. They hold structural, systemic power.
Yeah.
This religious court has the constitutional authority to veto laws passed by the secular parliament if those laws are deemed incompatible with Islamic principles.
Wow.
They even decide who is permitted to run for political office. So the fundamental religious principles dictate the boundaries of political reality.
The operating system controls what programs are allowed to run?
Precisely. And this isn't just an Islamic phenomenon. We see a similar fundamentalist push in Myanmar, for example, among certain highly influential Buddhist monks.
Right, they want to impose fundamental Buddhist principles on the entire nation.
Yes. The political mechanism is different from Iran, but the philosophical goal is identical. They want the religious framework to be the primary, unchallengeable operating system for the state.
Which creates severe friction with non-Buddhist minority populations.
Often violent friction, yes, because suddenly those minorities find themselves incompatible with the state's OS.
Okay, so if that's the fundamental OS, what does the contextual app look like in practice? How does a religion influence the public square without taking over the government?
So the contextual approach operates on the belief that politics should certainly be influenced by divine principles, like justice or charity, but as part of a wider, pluralistic tapestry.
It plays nice with others.
Right. It adapts to the surrounding political circumstances. The Aga Khan Development Network is a great example of this. They originate from the Ismaili tradition of Shia Islam, but their public square engagement looks radically different from Iran's.
Because they focus on healthcare and education, right?
Exactly. They do massive state-level work-building hospitals and universities across Africa and Asia, driven entirely by their religious values. But they aren't trying to install a theocracy.
They're just providing vital services and working alongside secular governments.
Working alongside, yes. Or, looking at Myanmar again, we could look at the Saffron Revolution in 2007.
Right, with a totally different group of Buddhist monks.
Yeah. Tens of thousands of monks took to the streets to stand in solidarity with impoverished citizens against a brutal military dictatorship. They were supporting multi-party democracy.
So they weren't trying to establish a Buddhist state, they were just using their moral authority to advocate for human rights.
Exactly. That's the contextual approach.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. So moving on to the second element of religion, sacred symbols and rituals and how they redefine reality.
This is where we transition from political structures to the psychology of power.
Yeah, and there's this observation from Thomas Merton, the Trappist monk, where he's watching a Catholic mass. He sees the monks in their white cowls performing this ancient ritual, and he realizes that the church, not the government buildings or the military bases, is the real capital of the country.
It's a profound realization.
But I really want to dig into the why here, because to an outside observer, a ritual just looks like pageantry, right? It's just people reciting old words and burning incense. Why does a political scientist actually care about monks performing a mass?
They care because rituals actively redefine where ultimate power lies in the material world. When those monks perform the mass for the millions of believers in that society, that ritual is the literal intersection of heaven and earth.
It's pulling divine favor down to their land.
Right. It's an assertion of immense power. It establishes a hierarchy of authority that competes directly with, and often supersedes, secular government authority.
Oh, I see. So if a citizen believes the ritual is what actually keeps the country safe, the secular military suddenly looks like a secondary power.
Exactly. And it's not just monks. Think about monarchies. Over 20% of modern states still have monarchs. Kings, queens, emperors.
Yeah, and the rituals surrounding them, the coronations, the anthems, that's not just for the tourists.
Not at all. Those pageants are rooted in the concept of divine right. A coronation is a symbolic mechanism designed to publicly legitimize political power. It broadcasts the message to the population. This is the exact coordinate where the untouchable authority of the universe intersects with our nation.
Wow. It grounds state power in something transcendent.
Yes.
Okay, so rituals control the present moment. They say this is where the power is right now, but rituals end. How does that power survive over centuries?
That brings us to the machinery of faith. Stories and communities. They sustain power across time.
Right, the sacred stories that connect the past, present, and future.
Yes, religions provide a grand narrative arc that gives chaotic human events profound meaning. And because these stories are deeply embedded in our psychology, they become incredibly potent political tools.
Let's use the example of Jubilee from the Sages because this is fascinating. For anyone unfamiliar, what exactly is the biblical concept of Jubilee?
So Jubilee originates in the Hebrew Bible, in the book of Leviticus.
Hmm.
It describes a mandated period every 50 years, intended as a total societal reset. All debts are canceled, slaves are freed, and ancestral lands are returned to their original families.
It's this radical narrative of economic justice.
Exactly. And in the 1990s, a massive coalition of Jewish and Christian communities took this ancient story and weaponized it, peacefully of course,
Hmm.
to advocate for global debt relief for developing nations.
The Jubilee 2000 campaign.
Right. They successfully pressured the G8 and the World Bank into altering modern international economic policy based on a thousands of years old text.
Which is a masterclass in transnational mobilization.
It really is. But it also exposes the extreme malleability of these sacred narratives. The very same concept can be used for opposing political ends.
Right, because just a few years later, in 2003, George W. Bush used the Jubilee text, but definitely not for debt relief.
No. He used it to celebrate and culturally justify the military invasion of Iraq. He quoted Isaiah, "To the captives come out, and to those in darkness be free." He mapped the ancient sacred story of divine liberation directly onto a modern military campaign.
That is wild. I have to ask, does the sheer flexibility of these stories make them inherently dangerous? If the exact same text can justify debt relief and dropping bombs, can any charismatic leader just twist a narrative of peace into a justification for war?
That is the enduring vulnerability of all sacred texts. They aren't inherently dangerous themselves, but their ability to confer ultimate, unquestionable legitimacy makes them highly sought-after tools.
Because if you have the divine mandate, you bypass regular logic.
Exactly. When a secular leader taps into a sacred story, they are borrowing the authority of the divine. And because these texts are poetic and require interpretation, whoever controls the interpretation controls a massive amount of political capital.
It's like having a political blank check. Anyone who disagrees isn't just unpatriotic, they're a heretic.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Which leads to the fourth element of religion: communities acting together or religious identity politics. Faith provides the infrastructure for collective action.
And the Rosa Parks example here just shatters how we're usually taught civil rights history. We're taught she was just a tired seamstress who randomly decided not to give up her seat.
Right, which completely misses the structural component. The civil rights movement didn't run on spontaneous individual exhaustion. Rosa Parks was deeply embedded in an active, highly organized faith community.
She was a trained activist.
Yes, she was acting as a representative of a community that had spent years mobilizing around a shared moral vision derived from sacred texts. Her individual act was heavily scaffolded by the collective power and communication networks of her faith community.
It's the difference between one person shouting in the dark and a massive choir singing in unison. You can't ignore the choir.
Exactly. And this mobilized community concept extends globally. Transnational faith networks can drive environmental sustainability, fighting climate change, because they view the earth as a sacred creation.
But conversely, those same mechanisms can fuel terrorism.
Unfortunately, yes. A shared religious identity and global communication network can be used to justify and coordinate violence. The moral outcomes are wildly different, but the underlying mechanism, a global community acting in unison based on divine demands, is identical.
Wow. Okay, so we've broken down religion. Divine forces in the public square, symbols redefining reality, sacred stories, and mobilized communities. But religion sits within a broader framework of how we live together, which is culture.
Yes, we need to decode culture and strip it down to its political mechanics.
Because in IR, culture isn't just local food and flags.
No, if religion provides specific operational instructions, culture is the entire environment in which those instructions run, and the sources provide four elements of culture. The first is common life, which is how a society answers the fundamental question of how to share the same physical space.
Right. How do millions of people interact without killing each other? And the sources contrast France and the UK here. France has this strict secularism model called laïcité. How does that work?
Laïcité insists on a strictly secular public sphere. The cultural agreement is that religion is entirely a private matter. So public spaces, especially state institutions like public schools, must be completely free from religious influence or visible display.
So no Catholic crosses, no Islamic hijabs, no Jewish kippahs in public schools?
Exactly. It's engineered to be a neutral zone. And this stems from their historical trauma with the French Revolution. They wanted to permanently remove the Catholic Church's power over the state.
But then you look at the UK, and they have a totally different answer to the same question.
Right. The UK historically embraces a multicultural model. They accommodate diverse cultural and religious expressions in the public square. It's entirely normal to see UK police officers wearing turbans or hijabs as part of their official uniform.
So France says, shed your identity at the door, and the UK says, bring your identity into the public square. Two totally different ways to engineer society.
And when those models are challenged, you get friction.
Yeah, and actually, speaking of friction in common life, this perfectly ties into our Danish politics focus. We see this in Danish political debates all the time, right? Like the 2005 Mohammed cartoon crisis.
Oh, absolutely. That is a textbook example.
That was a perfect storm.
Yeah.
You had a secular cultural understanding of absolute free speech literally colliding with a religious cultural understanding of what is sacred and untouchable. It totally disrupted the agreed-upon rules of common life.
Exactly. And that naturally bleeds into the second element of culture. Symbols of group identity, architecture, monuments, landscapes. They constantly remind the population of who they are and what they value.
Like the Washington Monument or a statue in a town square. It's the society saying, this is who we are.
Right. And that's why these symbols are contested battlegrounds. When a society debates tearing down a historical statue, they are negotiating their cultural identity and narrative of power.
Which leads to the third element, stories of our place in the world, foundation myths.
Yes. The sources contrast how colonial nations dealt with indigenous stories. In the U.S. and Australia, the dominant story was manifest destiny and conquest, which actively erased the original ancient stories of those lands.
But New Zealand took a different approach in 1840 with the Treaty of Waitangi.
Yes. Despite ongoing debates and historical flaws, that treaty legally recognized Maori sovereignty to a degree and preserved their cultural story within the national framework.
It forced the colonizer and indigenous stories to coexist.
Exactly. It maintained their political identity and leverage.
And finally, the fourth element of culture, agreement on what is good. Culture defines what a good life looks like.
And when two cultures in the same space hold diametrically opposed definitions of the good, you inevitably see violent conflict.
The Malala Yousafzai example is so harrowing, but illustrates this perfectly.
It does. Malala campaigned for girls' education, which the international community views as a universal good. But that clashed directly with the Taliban's fundamentalist cultural definition of a good society, where secular education for women is a profound evil.
So the assassination attempt wasn't just random terrorism, it was cultural enforcement.
Precisely. They were violently enforcing their cultural boundaries.
It's like a family's internal lore. You know the unspoken rules at the dinner table, but when someone breaks those rules, the family goes to war with itself.
That's culture change. It's a painful process of redefining the unspoken rules.
So what happens when religion and culture collide or merge? Section 4 of our discussion.
Well, the anthropologist Clifford Geertz argued that religion is itself a cultural system. They are constantly overlapping and competing for ultimate authority.
Which brings us back to Najaf in 2003. The U.S. military had to negotiate with the Ayatollah because his religious status within the Shia cultural system gave him the actual leverage, not the secular mayors.
Exactly. He was the ultimate head of state in practice because his moral guidance carried infinitely more weight than secular law.
And the second case study is Poland in the 1980s. The dock workers in Gdańsk formed the Solidarity Union against the communist regime. On paper, it's a labor dispute.
But the Catholic Church stepped in and performed mass inside the shipyards, behind the strike lines.
They took the ultimate symbol of divine power and placed it inside an illegal strike.
Yes, they transformed an economic dispute into a spiritual battle for the soul of Poland. The communist government had the weapons, but the church had the cultural narrative.
And the narrative won.
It did. And this illustrates a concept by Jonathan Fox. The dual trends of secularization and sacralization happening simultaneously.
Some places are removing religion from the public sphere, while others are seeing a massive resurgence of it.
Exactly. Western academics used to think secularization was a one-way street globally, but the data proves otherwise.
So for policymakers or diplomats, it is a fatal mistake to treat religion as just a quaint subcategory of local culture?
Absolutely fatal. Diplomats must be fluent in the religious vernacular of their region. They have to recognize when a religious leader holds the ultimate keys to peace or conflict.
Which brings us to our final section, clash versus dialogue. Are these deeply held beliefs doomed to cause global war, or can they foster cooperation?
To navigate this, we look at the ambivalence of the sacred.
It sounds like a paradox.
It is. Religion and culture carry the potential for both horrific violence and restorative peace simultaneously. They are amplifiers of human intent.
Let's talk about the clash side. Samuel P. Huntington's Clash of Civilizations thesis.
Right. After the Cold War, Huntington theorized that future conflicts wouldn't be ideological, like capitalism versus communism, but cultural and religious.
He divided the world into civilizational blocks, Western, Islamic, Confucian, and said the fault lines between them would be the battlegrounds.
Yes. And after 9/11, many people pointed to his book as prophetic.
But doesn't a theory like that run the massive risk of becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy? If we build our foreign policy around inevitable clashes, don't we guarantee a war?
That is the most devastating critique of Huntington. Framing global relations as an inevitable war strips away nuance and empowers extremists who want binary conflict. It closes off diplomacy.
Which is why the alternative model is so important, the dialogue of civilizations.
Initiated by the UN, influenced by Iranian President Mohammad Khatami in the late 90s, this seeks to use those exact same spiritual and cultural values to build bridges instead of walls.
Acknowledging the power of the sacred, but aiming it toward peace.
Exactly. You can't say religion is purely good or purely evil. It's both. The Hindu mystic Ramakrishna said, religion is like a cow. It kicks, but it also gives milk.
I love that quote. It's powerful and dangerous, but also deeply nourishing.
That perfectly encapsulates the ambivalence of the sacred. For every text used to justify invasion, the same text is used by activists for debt relief. You have to hold both realities in your mind.
Okay, so before we wrap up, I think we really need to crystallize all this. Let's do 3 quick key takeaways for our listeners, especially the students and practitioners out there. First point.
Well, first, religion and culture absolutely cannot be treated as mere background noise in international relations. They are the actual operating systems of society. If you ignore them, you fundamentally misunderstand where power truly lies.
Right. Second takeaway. Having a nuanced view of this completely disarms those simplistic, binary, clash of civilizations narratives.
Yeah, exactly. When you understand the ambivalence of the sacred, you realize that the same cultural forces that can ignite wars can also be leveraged to build incredibly durable peace treaties.
And the third point, really practically speaking, teachers, diplomats, and policymakers have to start bringing these themes explicitly into the classroom and into policy discussions. We need practitioners who are fluent in religious vernacular, not just economic theory.
I couldn't agree more. It's essential.
Well, this has been an incredibly enlightening exploration. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, thank you for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation.
To our listeners, thank you for tuning in to episode 9 of our summer series. Remember, if you want more deep analysis, including our exclusive briefings on Danish politics, please check out our Patreon. The link is right down there in the description.
Yes, definitely check that out.
And please, if you enjoyed today's show, follow the podcast and rate it 5 stars so we can reach even more people. It really makes a huge difference.
It really does.
We'll be back next time to tackle another massive topic, global poverty and wealth. But I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over.
Oh, I like this.
We've talked a lot today about ancient texts, historical monarchs, and deep geographic cultures. But our world today is rapidly changing, right? It's becoming increasingly instantaneous, completely digital, and largely borderless.
Yeah, the internet is fundamentally changing the cultural landscape.
Exactly. So as this entirely new global digital internet society continues to develop, how will it generate its own sacred stories and rituals? Will the great international clashes of the future still be fought over physical borders and ancient monuments? Or will they be fought between vastly different, borderless digital cultures, competing fiercely for the ultimate authority over what is considered the good?
It's a profound, unresolved question.
Something to think about the next time you log on. Thanks for listening, everyone. Keep looking beneath the surface.